Welcome, everyone. We are very happy to welcome you to this special seminar at the 2018 UCSF-Stanford CERC Immersion Program. In this program, basically, the attendees come together to learn some new aspects on regulatory market for the development of new medical products. And it's very interesting because since the beginning of April, all the attendees have been involved in solving different cases. And one of these case studies will be discussed today by Lara and Daniela. And basically, in this specific case study, we will be talking about the regulation of high-cost treatments in Latin America, more specifically about Brazil. But before we talk about the case study, I would like to take this time to actually acknowledge some wonderful people that have helped us out in this case resolution. So you can see on the left side of the slide all the team that worked together and worked hard to actually make it possible today for Lara and Daniela present on this case study. We would also like to acknowledge the CERC UCSF-Stanford and the Brazilian regulatory agency ANVISA. And we would also like to acknowledge two Brazilian foundations that have supported us with this particular project, Fundação Lehman and Fundação Estudar. So now I would like to introduce actually our speakers. They come from ANVISA, from the Brazilian Regulatory Agency, and it's been a huge pleasure for us to be working with them since the beginning of April. So Lara Pereira, she holds a degree in International Relations by University of Brasilia. She has been working at ANVISA since 2014, and currently her focus is on drug price regulation policies. Daniela Sturzenegger, she holds a master's degree in public policy and development by a joint program between two different institutions, the Institute for Applied Economic Research, IPEA, and Oswald Cruz Foundation. She has been working at ANVISA since 2003, and currently her focus is on good regulatory practices. So welcome, Lara and Daniela, and it's going to be a great pleasure to hear the outcomes of this case study.
Okay, so thank you, William. Thank you, everyone, for attending. Good afternoon. Lara and I, we are very pleased to be here to present the results of our discussions regarding the challenges in the regulation of high-cost treatments and overview from Latin America. So as said, what we're about to present is a result of a case study developed during the CERC Immersion program, and it does not represent the view or opinion of the Brazilian Health Regulatory Agency, but our own. In addition, although it was based on Brazilian data and experience, once we have been working together with other Latin America countries, we believe it could serve them as a model or at least be of an help. So the question raised in this case study was how to ensure accessibility to effective medicines in the context of limited government budgets. And to do so, we had to consider the high costs faced by the pharmaceutical companies during drug development, manufacturing, marketing, as well as the universal healthcare system that is in place in Brazil. So we intend to present you with an overview of our current price regulation system, along with the issue that motivated this case study, that is the recent entry in the Brazilian market, especially in the last few years, of high-cost drugs. And this issue raised some questions we try to answer here, as are high costs a trendy? Is this impacting somehow our federal government budget? And finally, are our regulations ready to deal with it, or are they enough to deal with it? After that, we will bring you an overview of what measures other countries, especially in Europe, have been taking when facing the same problem, or at least have been suggested. And last but not least, what the CERC program gave us as insights As I said, Lara and I, we are very pleased to be here. We learned so much in a short time, and we are certainly going to take everything back home and share with our colleagues at ANVISA. So, we'd like to give you a brief understanding of how our current price regulation took place. It was a mixture of theoretical assumptions regarding the concept of market failures in the pharmaceutical sector, along with the Brazilian scenario in the 90s. At that time, we had rapidly increasing prices for drugs. At the same time, the sales were decreasing, and to make it even worse, there were scandals regarding fraud and abusive prices of medicines. And these scandals led to an investigation by a commission of the Brazilian parliament, which final report strongly suggested that a renewal in a structural manner of the way medicines and its prices were being regulated in Brazil was needed. And this ended up with the creation of ANVISA in 1999, and of first CAMED in 2000, which became CIMED in 2003. And CIMED is the Brazilian Medicines Market Regulation Chamber. So, for a better understanding of how these two institutions are fitted within the Brazilian government, we have this organogram. And although we have actually 29 ministries under our executive branch, we have highlighted here just 5, which are the ones that are involved in the price regulation. Among them, we have the Ministry of Health, and under it we have ANVISA. And the reason why we have a dotted line here, it's because ANVISA has a different status when compared to other organizations that are under the Ministry of Health. We say that ANVISA is vinculated but not subordinated to the Ministry of Health, which means it has autonomy for taking administrative and financial decisions. ANVISA is the organization responsible for approving drugs for the Brazilian market after the company is accomplished with efficacy, safety, and quality requirements, as does FDA here in US. On the other hand, we have CIMED. That is the reunion of these 5 ministries. CIMED is the organization responsible for establishing the price rules and setting the price of medicines, the ceiling price for medicines after it gains a market authorization. The rules for price are determined at the Resolution 2 of 2004. And the Chamber counts on ANVISA to execute the decisions of the 5 ministers. So there is a department within ANVISA called as CIMED. It's a secretariat that executes the 5 ministers' decisions. So to sum up, the path of a drug in Brazil includes its authorization by ANVISA, the definition of its price by CIMED, and only after that the drug can actually be in the market, and then it can be acquired by the public sector, and in this case we are talking mainly about the Ministry of Health, which covers around 75% of the Brazilian population, or it can be acquired by the private sector. Either way, buyers can negotiate it with companies any price below the ceiling price set by CIMED. And we just want to make clear here that neither ANVISA or CIMED are part of this negotiation process. And so now Lara is going to explain us the rules established at Resolution 2.
Thank you, Daniela. Now that we have some idea of how the institutional framework work in Brasilia, I'm gonna try to explain how we do regulate prices in Brazil. New drugs can be classified either as category 1 or category 2, and the difference between them are basically about clinical improvement. If a drug can be proven to be better comparing to what we already use for that same indication, then it will be placed in category 1. And how do we mean by improvement? Resolution 2 of 2004 says that improvement is greater efficacy, less adverse effect, or a reduction in the global cost of treatment. And how do we measure improvement? With the best scientific evidence available, we use head-to-head studies or indirect comparisons, meta-analysis, and so on, when they are available, of course. And if your product falls into category 1, your price will be defined as the lowest among 9 reference countries. There is an important rule here too that we call provisional price rule. It says that you need at least 3 reference prices to have a final price. Let's say that when we are setting the price in the Brazilian market, we can only find 2 prices approved among these 9 countries. There's no problem. The product can be marketed in our in Brazil, but your price will be provisional until we find a 3rd price for comparison. If your drug cannot prove to be superior to what already exists in our market for the same indication, your product will be defined with 2 criteria. Your price will be defined based on 2 criteria. The lowest among 9 reference countries, as in category 1, but also the cost of treatment of existing therapies with same indication. We're talking about standard of care here. So, what are the results of this regulations? We have reached price stability. In the 90s, we had increasing prices and variation of prices very out of control. After the regulation, we reached some stability in the prices. And the question is, has price control prevented companies from investing in Brazil? And the answer is no. We were the 10th market in 2011, according to IMS, and we became the 8th market in 2016, and we are expected to be the 5th market in 2021. So we think we have a positive policy here, but we are facing a new scenario, maybe that calls for improvement in our regulations. We have some very high-cost drugs approved recently, like Spinraza, Soliris, and Sovaldi. Sovaldi is one of the hepatitis C new drugs, and their costs are very well known all around the world for being very expensive. Soliris is one of the most expensive drugs purchased by the Ministry of Health in Brazil, with an estimated cost per patient for 1 year of treatment of almost $200,000. And we have Spinraza with an approved price of $109,000 per vial, with an estimated cost of more than $700,000 a year for patients. And these very high prices made us raise some questions. Are these high-cost drugs exceptions or a new trend? Are they outliers, or are they just the beginning of a trend of very high-cost drugs being launched in the market? And are these high-cost drugs impacting or expected to impact the public budget? If so, does our price regulation need improvements to deal with this problem? To answer the first question, we first asked our peers, other regulators, and they were also worried about the challenging of financing new and expensive drugs For instance, we went to the Fair Pricing Forum last year, and there were a lot of different countries complaining about the same challenge, financing high-cost drugs, and even developed countries. So we seem to believe that this is a global trend. Also, we had a report from OECD that says that the number of high-cost drugs and their prices will continue to grow. So we should expect for more high-priced drugs to be launched in the near future. There is a study quoted by this report that shows the evolution of the cost of treatment in oncology in the United States. Maybe you can check that later if it's correct. We have some pretty expensive outliers here in recent years. So this is a trend globally. And two other important things that have impact on prices are happening right now. One, countries are creating incentives to the development of orphan drugs and unmet needs. And two, the emergence of personalized medicine. What do these two things have in common in terms of costs and prices? Of course, in terms of health, they are very positive for patients, but I'm talking about costs of development and prices. They mean that new drugs are being developed for small populations, and the small populations require higher prices to cover for the company's costs of development. So this poses a challenge for public budgets. And let's see how they are impacting the Brazilian budget.
So to answer our second question, we present some data regarding the federal health budget. In blue, we have the total spending without pharmaceutical products, which are in gray. And so the sum of them, the blue and gray, indicates the total health spending of the federal government. We can see that the values are in $1 billion, and we can see an increase in the spend related to pharmaceutical products from 3.2 billion in 2010 to 4.8 billion in 2016, a 50% increase, while the total health spending grew 5.9%. And we can also see that the share of the pharmaceutical products in the total health spending also increased from 11 to 16% in the same period. And one reason we have to believe that this increase is due to the high-cost drugs and not just because more drugs are being distributed to more people is presented in this graphic. Here we have some data regarding the federal government spending on medicines demanded by lawsuits, what we call judicialization. And the most part of the drugs demanded in court are high-cost drugs. Since 2010, there was an increase of 726% in the amount spent due to the judicializations. And the share of the lawsuits in the total spending on pharmaceutical products also grew from 1.3% in 2010 to 8% 5 years later. And in addition, on the top of the most expensive drugs purchased after judicializations, we have 11 specialty drugs, which either are among the drugs with high prices approved by CMED or haven't yet been granted with a market authorization in Brazil, which usually makes the price negotiated and paid by the Ministry of Health reach high values as well. And it's also important to say that these 11 drugs accounted for 92% of the lawsuits budget in 2017, although they had covered only 1,334 patients. So I think we can say from here that the answer for our question is yes, the high-cost drugs are impacting the federal government budget in a negative and unsustainable way.
So, given that we are expecting more high-cost drugs to come to the market, and they are impacting our public budgets. How can we deal with it? How can we improve our regulation to deal with high-cost drugs? One measure we have already taken, it's what we call the provisional price rule. To explain this rule, I would like to explain how a little about the Solaris case. Solaris were being demanded by patients by lawsuits because it wasn't incorporated into the public system yet. But the company in charge for its selling had not filed a price petition to CMED. As a result, the Ministry of Health had no alternative but to buy at the price demanded by the company, a very high price. We talked to the company and explained the importance of filing the petition, and it actually did it last year. With the price finally regulated by CMED, we estimate an economy of $88 million per year. But now, we don't have to wait for the company to file a petition. If a product is being sold with no price approval, CMED can set a provisional price until the company price petition is reviewed and set. So we give some protection to Ministry of Health when it is demanded to buy a medicine by a judicial order. Other proposals that we are studying refers to changes in the reference price system. We would like to increase the number of countries in the basket and include low and middle income countries like Colombia. Colombia has recently begun to regulate their market too. We are working closely, and we think it would be very positive to have countries with similarities to Brazil in our basket. And also, we would like to increase the number of countries necessary to reach a final price. Remember I said we did it 3 countries at least. We would like to have more because it would give us some time to understand how other agencies are valuing that product and have more information to decide upon a final price in Brazil. Because once the price is set, we cannot change it. This is a flaw in our regulation. We don't have legal authorization to change prices after they become final. And we would like to establish new conditions for final price as well. This is still under study, but one thing that could be done, for example, is when a drug is approved based on phase 2 trials, an orphan drug, for instance, that needs fast approval, we could set a price and it will be provisional until the results of phase 3 trials. This is something that could be done. We still haven't decided upon it, but it's under discussion. And how the world is dealing with high-cost drugs? Well, countries can intervene directly in prices, for example, in price reviews or reduction of distribution margins, but as I explained to you, this is very hard for us to do because we don't have legal authorization to change prices. We are interested in more indirect ways of regulating prices, including changes in the external reference price system. As I explained to you, we have some proposals under discussion. We also have health technology assessment for incorporation decisions. Health technology assessments are performed by an institution called Conitec in Brazil. And for decisions of what drug will be incorporated into the public system. I think that the role of Conitec will be more and more important over the years, and a closer interaction with the judiciary system would be positive too when judges are deciding on drugs demanded by lawsuits. Another interesting instrument is called Managed Entry Agreement, and it embodies an important principle of risk sharing among payers and companies. Some countries create price volume agreements, so price will be dependent upon the expected volumes of sales. If the volume is surpassed, then the price will be renegotiated. This is not likely, it's not very useful for Brazil because we have a private market too, so we can't predict how much the volume of sales will be. But the second type of agreement, it's very important to us because they condition the price to results to the benefit of the patient. So if a drug does not deliver the expected benefit to the patient, then the price could be reviewed as well. This, of course, would demand more post-market studies, but I think it would be very positive if we had more data about how the drug works in real life. And what else can be done? We think that this is a problem shared with all the countries, so a global problem calls for a global discussion. We then should support cooperation among countries so we can find more creative ways to deal with this challenge. And I think we should include companies in the dialogue. Companies are a very important part of this equation. We learned here at CERSI that some companies are concerned about make the costs of development of drugs more efficient, so this could lead to lower prices. And we should also establish academia-government collaborations, so regulators will be well informed about the state of art of science and could act in advance. And of course, ANVISA and CIMED are open to comments and discussions because we understand this is a very complex problem. We are starting to understand the problem and starting to think about ways to improve our regulations, and we are open to any suggestions. So, to sum it up, Brazilian drug price regulation has been important for price stability and market growth. But high-cost drugs are a trend and are becoming a challenge for public budget. We have to think about some possible solutions. Provisional price and changes in the external reference price system can improve the regulatory framework. And risk sharing is an important principle that are guiding us in our discussions about how can we improve our regulations. But more discussion and collaboration among all stakeholders are needed because this is something that we are starting to understand. We are very pleased with your presence here, and we are open to any comments, and we would be glad to answer any question if you have.
I just wanted to thank Lara and Daniela for their presentation, which was very informative. And I would like to open up the question and answer section. I would start off with just asking how would increasing the basket size in the reference countries, and especially the number of countries that you would need to actually set a price, wouldn't it slow down the regulation process and increase the amount of judicialization that would happen?
Okay. No, it's not our intention to delay the process of approval of the price. The only thing is that the price will be provisional. You have a price, you have authorization to market the product, but we will continue our research until we have more information to decide upon a final price.
In that example, and also in examples where there's not enough reference countries, how is the provisional price? In the example where there aren't enough reference countries, how is the provisional price determined?
This is a good question. We have never faced this kind of situation. Sometimes we have only one country, especially in the United States, where the process is faster. But yes, we had one case. The dengue vaccine was first launched in Brazil, not in other developed countries, so we didn't have any reference and we didn't have any comparators too. So what we did was cost efficiency study. It took us 6 months to develop this study to reach a final price.
drug to get into the Brazil market, do they have a multinational trial that including Brazilian as part of patients experiment, or it's not required?
Clinical trials does not necessarily have to have Brazilian patients. This is something I cannot answer properly, but I know that some studies are accepted with other kind of patients.
Do you have any data for devices that is following more or less the same path as you're seeing for the, what is the name of the organization? CIMED. It is more or less the same path, and it's under regulation of the same ministries, or no?
Regarding devices, we don't regulate the price of devices, but the Congress is already discussing this as something that in the future will be done, because we have investigated very extremely high prices in Brazil. For instance, we buy a stent, I don't know, for $800 in the United States, and it becomes like $20,000 in Brazil, something like that. It's very, super expensive. So there are some investigation undergoing, and probably we will regulate the prices of devices too.
So how about the diagnostic? Because a lot of this personalized medicine, you have a companion diagnosis with the drug. Do you count that diagnostics cost as part of the drug cost, or it's separate?
Yeah, it's separate. We only regulate the prices of the drugs.
How about indications? Do you just translate the U.S. indication to your drug, usable, or you integrate all the multinational indications? Because we notice some of the drug have different indications at different markets.
It depends on what the company applies, and we evaluate the indications that they are applying.
Hi, so is there any other mechanism for the patient to request access to the medication other than the lawsuit, and is the healthcare provider involved in that decision?
Yes. Let me explain. Some of the drugs are already incorporated by the public system. And but 25% of the population has private insurance, so they can demand from the private insurers too. But as drugs are coming into the market in a most fast way, then we can deal with them. So some drugs are not incorporated in time, but the patients know about them, and they can demand by lawsuits, because our Constitution says that health is a right for everyone. So judges, based on this constitutional right, has granted the patient the right to access the drug.
That is quite of a broad question and maybe a little bit out of the scope, but is there any studies to perhaps rethink that or no? Just as an example, I mean, this broad term that health is the right of the citizen is something that the state needs to provide indefinitely. Is there something being studied in how to manage that, or is there any discussions that you guys know of, or?
I don't think the constitutional right will change. This is something very keen to Brazilians, because this could be used to government to deny access to patients. But there is some discussions about limits, how judges could improve their decisions. For example, in the past, we had a lot of drugs without approval from ANVISA being demanded in court, and the judges were granting access to these drugs, even experimental drugs. This is changing. Judges are becoming more conscious, and there is a lot of talks between the judiciary systems, academia, and other regulators. And it's a delicate theme, but we are trying to evolve in these discussions.
One more question. It's very interesting that you mentioned about post-marketing data analysis and to help you to understand what are the data systems that you have in your country to be able to capture the post-marketing information, both efficacy and safety?
Do you know?
Yeah, we have a system ANVISA, but it's for the notification of adverse reactions. And actually, so far is what I can remember. But and anyone from the patient to a doctor, anyone can do the notifications, can notify.
So it's not required. You don't have like national healthcare database or something like UK.
I don't think so.
What I see, this is from a personal point of view, agencies are demanding safety post-market studies, but not always about efficacy. And I think this could change in benefit of everyone. We should be worried about results as well, efficacy results. So we have more information to be sure that we are paying a fair price, the product are delivering what it's supposed to, and we would be more confident of our, as payers, I mean.
One last question.
Hi, I'm from Brazil. I'm Brazilian. So I work with regulation in Hospital Albert Einstein. And I think sometimes, I don't know what you think about it, the high cost for doing a clinical research in Brazil, because our regulation has some steps that makes clinical trials very expensive. Do you think this can impact the high cost of medications?
Sure. Clinical trials are a very important part of the costs of developing drugs. And I don't know much about what is being done in Brazil, but I know that we are concerned about that too. ANVISA has some improvement in the clinical trials approval. But yes, this is in my personal opinion, this is something that could help lowering the costs of lowering the prices of drugs if we have lower costs of development.
Any more questions? No? Okay, then I just wanted to thank you guys again for answering the questions and providing all this information. So if you please give one more round of applause to them.
Thank you.